Alright, welcome back to another SegWeather video looking at your August 2026 official update for the month of what to expect as we head into next month, which starts tomorrow in fact. So happy early August for you guys, or August if you guys are seeing this video tomorrow or on Sunday. But in this video, we're going to break down what to expect for your August going forward. Now, there is a lot of meteorology that's going to go into this video, so if you're not a big fan of all the crazy meteorology mumbo jumbo, you can skip to this time card in this video right now to get the latest on what to expect temperature wise, precipitation wise, and severe weather wise with your August outlook. Now, if you're still here, we're going to go ahead and dive into the main details of what to expect meteorology wise with this August coming forward. And with this update, we're going to dive into the PNA and the NAO oscillation, what they are, and how they will have effects on the pattern, and also discussing on the Madden-Julian oscillation and its effects and what it means for your August. And then looking at similar years that represent the same pattern compared to this year with this August coming in, and then looking at what to expect severe weather wise, as this is also important with the month of August as well. Now, starting off, little sidetrack, starting off with El Nino at first. Currently, El Nino is already at the strong threshold, as many of you have already heard. El Nino is already pretty strong right now, and as of last month, it was at 1.5 on the threshold scale, so already a strong El Nino. And now there's rumblings that, according to a lot of these models, it's either at a just below a 1.89 or closer to 2 to about a 3 on the threshold, meaning that it's already on its way to become either a very strong El Nino or a super El Nino. And that does verify when the final update does come out, probably tomorrow or at some point during the month of August for where it actually was. Then that could be pretty bad, as that means this El Nino is already outpacing the 1997 and the 2015 El Ninos, as both of them were already pretty strong El Ninos by the month of August, but this one's already exceeding that threshold a bit, if not a bit more, as according to these models, they're showing it already above those two years according to the dynamic average. The statistical average was a little less, but I do think that we're somewhere in the middle here with this model or models in general. And then looking at this other model showing a few other models by themselves, the relative models is what they call it. It's already showing it at a 2.0 range, maybe even a little bit higher, while these other two models just above it, just a bit more, and then this one's a little bit less. But again, I'll discount this model. These three other ones to focus on as the final update does come out for this one eventually in the month of August. But either way, a lot to talk about with that already. And now we're going to dive into the oscillations, with starting off with the Pacific North Oscillation, which is the official name. This oscillation focuses on the western part of the US, where it can influence temperatures a bit in those areas. And usually if it's positive, where values are above zero, that means warmer than average anomalies for a lot of the western part of the country. Now, if they're negative, it means the opposite, cooler than average anomalies for the western part of the country in general. And according to this graph, very negative early on in the month before turning neutral by the mid part of the month, so looking at a quick transition towards that. But even before then, looking at a quick cooler than average pattern for much of the western part of the US before it switched to neutral by the mid part of the month. So watching that very closely according to what this model is showing for the first half of August, and maybe even staying neutral throughout the second half of August. Now, looking at the NAO, it focuses on the eastern part of the US, so anywhere from Oklahoma up towards North Dakota, pointing eastwards, those areas in general. And same thing like the PNA. If it's positive, it means generally warmer. If it's negative, it means generally cooler than average. Now, with the NAO, with this model, according to the first half of August, it does show it remaining quite negative. So looking at cooler than average temperatures mainly likely for the first half of the month, for at least for the eastern part of the U.S. So seeing much more intrusions of cooler than average temperatures moving in at times, especially between about tomorrow and the first half of August in general, before we could see a positive switch over in the second half of the month. As you notice, the values start to turn towards positive by then. I do think at some point in August we could see a flip over to positive values, as we do see the return back to those warmer temperatures with a flip in the pattern by then. Now, looking at the Madden-Julian oscillation, it kind of goes hand in hand with the PNA and the NAO, except it's a little different, a little bit different flavor in general compared to PNA and the NAO. Now, with the Madden-Julian oscillation, it comes in 8 phases, so it means that we have, with all these 8 phases, there is a slightly different pattern with each of them. For example, with, let's say, a phase one, we're seeing wetter conditions in Indonesia, for example. With phase one, with phase two, it can switch to drier conditions for that area for that time frame. That's what it kind of entails with this Madden-Julian oscillation. And usually it goes hand in hand sometimes with fights with other oscillations. Like, for example, with the phase 5 oscillation that we will be going into for the first part of August, it does show it looking to be above average for much of the western part of the nation, although the PNA is showing negative for at least the first few days before turning average. And that's an example of it potentially could be fighting with this as we head into the first part of the month. So we could see warmer than average anomalies fighting with cooler than average anomalies, with strong cold fronts potentially in those areas fighting with that in the first part of the month, at least through, like, I would say August 7th, maybe August 8th, before we switch to phase 6, where it will be warmer in the plains, some of that in the Midwest, and then some of that towards the Pacific Northwest could be seen at as well. Now, with the eastern part of the U.S. looking to be cooler for both phases 5 and 6, which actually supports the NAO, where it's showing cooler than average anomalies for this region in general for both phases. So watching that for the first half of the month, and then the Southwest showing a bit cooler than average according to this model for the first half of the month, which kind of supports, again, the PNA a little bit, but still not all too much. As again, these two, there could be some fighting going on with the Madden-Julian oscillation and the PNA in the first half of the month. Now, moving on in the second half of the month, looking at a potential switchover, as after phase 6, around August 16th, August 17th, they do show a changeover to phase 7 by the middle part of the month, meaning crazy above average temperatures for the eastern part of the U.S. So looking at temperatures back in the 80s, upper 80s, 90s is what they're showing for phase 7 into phase 8, showing that occurring likely in these areas. Meanwhile, with phase 7 and phase 8 out west, a bit cooler, except for the Pacific Northwest in phase 8, where it does turn a bit warmer than average by the end of the month. But there will be a period where it looks to be a bit cooler than average, likely tied to the PNA, where it will turn slightly negative at some point in August, and then maybe, well, later in August, and then potentially try to turn back towards positive at the very end of the month. But again, this is the potential pattern for the second half of August. So potentially seeing a switch over to overly warm temperatures for the eastern half of the nation by then. Now, looking at precipitation wise, also slightly different, as with a Madden-Julian oscillation, it does show that, again, according to our phases, will be in phases 5 and 6 for the first half of the month. The greens indicate where it's wetter, the browns indicate where it's drier. It does show that we could have above average anomalies in the Rockies, maybe the Southwest, which is slightly true according to the outlooks. Does show that's going to be a bit wetter in these areas. I would disagree with the Midwest. There is an ongoing system that is bringing rainfall to this area right now, so it could skew these values a bit. But everywhere else makes sense with the phase 5. By phase 6, though, does show wetter than average anomalies for the Midwest in general, parts of the Southern Plains, to the Rockies, to parts of the extreme Northeast, maybe the Mid Atlantic. So turning a bit more wetter towards month by then, but the south remaining quite dry throughout that entire time frame. And then the second half of the month comes around, still wet in the Midwest, turning drier in the Northeast, wetter in the deep South now, and then the Rockies turning a bit wetter, as staying a bit wet as well. And then by the very end of the month, showing a overly wet pattern for much of the U.S. We're having very inactive days coming up, and if this is verified, then that could mean a very active end to the month of August. So first half maybe a little bit more active, mainly in the Midwest, but turns more active elsewhere by the end of August. Maybe even watching for some possible tropical development in the second half of August, especially across the Gulf. Could watch that very closely, as with the oscillations favoring wetter than average conditions for these areas in deep south, especially I'll argue very late August. We could see that occur at some point. I would say in the later August time frame, maybe closer to August 25th, right about then. But it's not said any factor could derail this, such as a cold front, maybe a high pressure nearby, that could lead to the pattern completely collapsing on itself in that time frame. Now we move on to the fun part, that being your analog years, where we focus on temperature years with the same exact pattern as of this upcoming August. And according to the past data, looked at the last 50 to 70 years, there's only 6 years that come out on top with almost similar patterns. These years being 1977, 1997, 2004, 2015, 2018, and 2023. But no, I did include weak to very strong El Nino events, as with every El Nino, every one of them is different in some way. So maybe with a strong El Nino, even with those, you can get one year where it's like very warm across the West Coast, 2020, for example, 2023, let's say that. And let's say, for example, in 2002, throughout random year out, it could be colder on average with a strong El Nino. Like, that's how different these onions could be, as they can bring contrast. While the West Coast remains largely the same with these patterns, the Midwest and to the Northeast, excuse me, tends to be a bit fickle with a lot of these August patterns. Now, according to 6 years, it does heavily favor a cooler Midwest and plains as well. So looking at that, according to the cooler than average anomalies of about 1 to 2 degrees below average, and then the West Coast to Deep South shows about a 1 to 2 to 3 degree difference above average for a lot of these areas. And even for the Northeast, this showed a bit skewed, a bit warmer for these areas as well. But that's with all 6 years combined in general. Now with precipitation, same exact thing, a bit skewed due to a lot of these years having slightly different patterns compared to some of these other years. But according to all 6 years combined, there's a general consensus that is primarily wetter in the Midwest, Plains, Northeast, and parts of the Southeast as well. So looking at all that being the case, the Rockies also some action there as well. While parts of Deep South are a bit drier than average, and even the Mid-Atlantic too, the Upper Plains, you'll see that as well. So a little different in those areas. While observing the 6 years where I pulled out for analog data, a couple of these years were a bit of outliers, especially 1987, 2004, and 2015, as these years again had a bias towards cooler than average temperatures, especially for just much of the Midwest, Plains, and even stretching to parts of the South, which I would argue does not look to be the case at all with this coming August, as with the NEO and the PNA, the Madden-Julian oscillation, and some of these other models. They do argue that that's not to be the case with this upcoming August, as they don't show that quite strong of a signal. So with that, I had to eliminate those years with a second look at it, which hence why 1977, 2018, and 2023 are the best analog years for this outlook, which 2023 being a strong El Nino kind of fits well into this time frame as well, which makes me feel a little better about going with 2023. 1977, 2018, again, follow the same exact pattern as 2023 as well, which hence why they're included in this outlook too. The only bias of 2018 though is the overly warm pattern in the Northeast, where it did show it was crazy warm in the Northeast, but I do think it'll be skewed slightly more towards slightly above average. So I don't think it's going to be that crazy warm up there. you will see more of that across the West Coast and places like Texas, where it's going to be a bit warmer than average, according to what's shown here with these analog years. And now with precipitation, also much better signal. It does show again, plains to northeast is quite wetter than average. The southeast also a bit wetter than average, with a bit of rainfall, and then the Rockies a bit of above average rainfall activity, likely tied to the monsoonal rainfall occurring in this area, and deep south a bit drier than average, especially over Texas, and then over the upper parts of Minnesota into parts of North Dakota, and even parts of the Atlantic showing below average precipitation anomalies in this area as well. So, looking at this potentially be the case for August in general. Now, looking at the CFS model, does show warmer than average temperatures for much of the west coast to mid south to the southeast. So I do agree with the signal that this was likely to occur, and also agree it does show that it would be cooler than average, or probably closer to average for a lot of the Midwest to northeast. I'll just turn it down just a tad to cooler than average for some of these areas. But overall, it's pretty much consistent in showing cooler than average temperatures for the north, for much of the Midwest to northeast, and then everywhere else a bit warmer than average as well. Now, looking at the precipitation, also showing a wetter signal from the Rockies to the Midwest to the Southeast, which is the exact same thing we saw in our analog years, showing the same exact pattern. Although the only thing I would argue against is Northeast, where it's showing drier than average conditions for this area. I think it's going to be a bit wetter than average, so I would definitely ignore what's being shown here in Northeast, as I think this is very much not going to happen for these areas. But elsewhere, I do agree with what they're showing here in general for the month of August with what can happen. Now we move on to the severe weather aspect of this, where I'm not sure a lot of you are thinking, well, will we be safe from severe weather in August? Do we typically see less tornadoes in August, since June and July were pretty bad? I'm sure a lot of you watching are also probably from the Midwest, and unfortunately for you guys, I hate to break it to you, but El Nino does not give you guys a break in August, as especially with El Nino factoring into this, and with the oscillations and with the previous years in general, with the analog years. Unfortunately, that does favor a active August for parts, especially for the Midwest and Northeast. As you'll see, of 1977, in that year, we had 83 tornadoes occur, which led to 6 fatalities and 96 injuries, which is quite a bit. So unfortunately, this was a quite tragic month for tornadoes, especially given that there were quite a few EF2, EF3, and EF4 tornadoes. The yellows indicating EF2, the oranges indicate EF3, and the red indicates an EF4. So there was one EF4 in the month of August, believe it or not, smack dab in the middle of Wisconsin. So for Wisconsin, I'm sure this does not make you feel makes you feel a little uneasy, and does not mean this is guaranteed to happen, but this is just putting into perspective of what can happen with this El Nino. This is only one of the years, 1977. Even there was a couple strong tornadoes as far south as Texas as well. Now looking at 2018, similar signal, mainly with the Midwest. You can see a lot of EF0s, EF1 tornadoes, and maybe even the one EF2 in Wisconsin. It's kind of the same signal with this exact year as well. Even given the fact this is a weak El Nino year, it still shows us the same signal of, again, quite a bit of tornado activity for a lot of these areas, even into the plains as well. A couple of tornadoes in the northeast in general. But luckily, with that year, despite having 124 tornadoes, there was only one injury that occurred with this month. But with 2023, a little bit different, a little more active as well. 167 tornadoes with 2 fatalities and 15 injuries that occurred with this month. And a lot of these stronger tornadoes occurred out here, again, parts of the Midwest, and even the parts of the Northeast. They saw an EF3 in New York. Luckily, that one killed no one. The one in Colorado was a significant tornado. Also, that one was, again, a pretty prolific tornado that occurred in the month of August. So overall, it, again, this just puts in the perspective that you can't let your guard down, especially in the month of August, as even with August, you still get some strong tornadoes. In August 2023, again, this was a strong El Nino, so just goes to show you that you can't let your guard down when it comes to severe weather in that mode. Now we move on to the final part of this video, all together, looking at temperature-wise, looking at a very warm west coast, looking at temperatures well into the 80s, 90s, maybe even 100 thrown in there, especially mid-month and perhaps again very late month as well after a little cool snap at some point in that time frame. And then looking at the mid-south, looking quite hot as well. Temperatures in the 90s to 100s as well for a lot of these areas. So looking to be a toasty August for this region. And then looking at slightly above average from the southwest into parts of the southeast, into the parts of northeast, as we do expect a cooler start to the month where we have a lot of this cool air coming in from Canada, seeing some cold fronts coming in before it switch over to mainly hotter than average temperatures in the second half of August. So turning a bit much more toasty, but even then, we will average out to just slightly above average for a lot of these areas across the East Coast, minus probably around New York City or even Trenton, New Jersey, maybe turning a bit more above average in those areas as well. But for the upper plains, looking to be a bit cooler than average for you guys, a bit more, especially for North Dakota and South Dakota. Those would be your bullseye for cooler than average temperatures during the month of August, but not overly strong signal across much of the Midwest. Looking at fairly average conditions, so looking at a mix of warmer than average temperatures and cooler than average temperatures at times throughout the month. But I do think we'll most likely trend from cooler than average first half of the month to warmer than average second half of the month. So expecting that for a lot of those areas as well. Now we move over to the precipitation, looking at above average precipitation smack dab in the middle of the Midwest into Northeast. So a lot of these areas will be seeing quite a bit of rainfall as systems will be tracking through these areas throughout the course of the month, especially for the first half of the month. I do think that will likely be the case of storm track, and then storm track may get pushed up to north a bit in the second half of the month as warmer air comes back into this region by then, and then maybe another area in the southeast tied to tropical storm development could see an uptick later on in the month of August. And then looking at below average precipitation for the mid south, especially for parts of southeastern Texas, looking at that being quite prevalent during the month. Southeast could see a little bit of that as well, and some of that also occurring across the upper plains as well for the month of August. But the West Coast looking at equal chances for rainfall as we will flip flop between drier than average to wetter than average at times throughout the month. Now we move on to severe weather. Unfortunately, if you're watching from the Midwest, not good news for you guys as we're looking at the bullseye for some severe weather to be possible, looking at a moderate risk for increased severe weather, especially for Minnesota, stretching down the northwestern parts of Indiana into the southwestern corner of Michigan. So looking at systems being quite prevalent during the month could bring some severe weather quite frequently at times, especially I would say first half of the month and then maybe a little bit more further north in the second half of the month. So watching the track slowly change as we progress throughout the month. And then the southeast could see an uptake. This is only due to increased potential for tropical storm development later on in the month as well. But other than that, that is it for this update. Thank you so much for watching and taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to always get updated whenever I drop a video on this channel. Have a great day and stay weather aware and happy August.